And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. Today, I am your host, Hank Garner, as always. And today, I am super excited to have Laura Beers with us to talk all about writing Regency romance and her journey from uh, the construction business to
Mhm.
writing Regency romance, which is totally a predictable story arc. I don't even know how you could make that up. But Laura she's a brand new author. She's just breaking in. She only has 61 items on her Amazon author page. She was correcting me just a minute ago. It looks like 48 or so published works. And then some of these are collections or
Yes.
various other publishing wonders on Amazon. But I have grabbed a number of your stories on Amazon, Laura. You have most of them, if not all. You can correct me on this in Kindle Unlimited, which is an amazing thing for
Yes.
readers and for people that do work like I do, where you want to sample from an author's massive catalog like you have. And I love them. They're such a fun experience to read. I know other readers will love these as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate
I'm
for being here.
I'm super excited to have you. Laura, we like to start conversations with a fun question sometimes. And
Okay.
one of those questions is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
So when I was younger, I remember I sat in front of the computer and I decided when I was about third grade that I wanted to be a writer. And so I wrote a story that was in my head and it was terrible. It was really bad. But my mom read it and she's like, well, maybe you'd be good at other things. And so
Good
I
old
kind of
mom.
took that as a hint, and which was fine. I then
Yeah.
life happened and I started getting like B's in English, and I thought maybe I can't be a writer. So
Well, that's hilarious because uh, I've done 1,500 or so of these author interviews, and the backstories of authors is one of my favorite things. And there some people got nothing but encouragement from early on, and you it's no wonder they turned out to be
yeah,
authors because they just constantly had that fed, and then other people just seem to have the gene, and uh, maybe you have to work at it for a while. I mean, we all have to work at it to hone our craft, but it's just not as evident early on to some folks that is as it is to others. So what fueled that drive to keep going at it, even when you had chosen a different career path? And so I guess what my question is what brought you back around to writing?
so I grew up, went on, majored in construction management, and started working in the construction field. Put my husband through school, and then I decided to stay at home with my kids. And my kids did not allow me to read because they were just rambunctious. And
We have
finally, when they,
5 kids. I totally understand that.
you are very brave. I only have three. So, um, and so finally, when they got a little older, I started watching TV shows like CSI and stuff that I'm like, I can't really have these on with my kids here because they're a
Yeah.
little too serious. And so I started reading, and I started reading Regency romance because that's what I loved. And I started reading one book, and it was about a female spy. And I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And so I was reading it, and it was terrible. Like, it was
Mm.
absolutely a terrible book. And I remember chucking it across the room after I read the last page. And I thought, I could do better than this. And that's when my mom said, why don't you? And so I started writing after that. And it was a terrible, once again, attempt. But I had a friend who majored in English literature, and she kind of helped me get through the different steps.
Nice. So first off, the first question I have, why construction management? What was it about that job that that you gravitated toward?
So when I went to school, I came from a long line of teachers.
Okay.
And my mom was a teacher, my grandmas were teachers, sisters were teachers, and I knew I would be a terrible teacher. And so my uncle actually owned a construction company in Prescott, Arizona. And he said, why don't you do construction management? And my other cousin, who's also a girl cousin, she's like, I'll do it with you. And so we said, why not? And I went into it and I didn't even know what drywall was. I mean, I knew in theory what drywall was, but
Sure.
I didn't really know
You'd
anything.
never built a house before.
Never built a house. I've never been on a construction site. And one of the professors actually told me, you know, you might not make a good fit in construction management. You don't know anything. And I remember leaving thinking, he's wrong. I can do this. And
Yeah.
that's when I started studying more and putting my head down, and I graduated and top of my class, and I really enjoyed it.
Wow. So did you work in the industry?
I did. I worked for a large general construction contractor in San Diego.
Wow.
So we built, one of the facilities we built was Johnson and Johnson in La
Oh,
Jolla.
wow.
And so that was the job that I was on for 5 years. And Johnson and Johnson is a great company, and they were very proud that they hired female engineers on the job
How about
sites.
that?
So I was shown off on their yacht and all these things, and it was fantastic. But I started realizing staying out until 11:30 at night and then having to get up at 6 a.m. to be on the construction site wasn't fun.
Yes.
So
Well, one thing that I love to ask people is, and I'll tell you why this is such a fun question for me. There's something about writers that um, there. Let me say it this way: there are very few writers that I have interviewed that knew from the very earliest of their recollections all the way through that they were going to be writers and that this was their only pursuit, and just head down straight into the writing life. Most people know that they want to be a writer, but they kind of take a circuitous route, and they meander through life, and they pick up some experiences here and meet people here, and all of these life experiences and relationships that are formed have a way of feeding into the creative spirit. So, what did you pick up from your time studying and working in construction that maybe it seems very unlikely, but maybe there's something in your writer toolkit that you picked up along the way from this?
so I had an editor early on who told me I was too specific on the construction.
Too
Whenever
specific.
too
Okay.
specific. So like when a spy was trying to get into the glass, you had to scrape off all the caulking and everything. She's like, readers don't care about that. That's too specific. So sometimes I actually had to kind of dumb down my construction experience a little. But I think ultimately what it taught me was that because I had someone who said I couldn't do it, and I proved him wrong. I think in my books, the same thing is I had other people who said, you can't write books, and I proved them wrong. So I think that's ultimately what I learned is not giving up.
And there's something about that specificity. Um, I've talked to writers who gather, it seems like reams and reams of information about their characters, and they go through all of this work to understand their world, their characters, their plot, and then they'll use a small portion of that in the actual writing. But there's something about that world building that stays in the writer's head, and because you understand that, then now you can explain that to the reader. Is it kind of like that where you didn't need to necessarily put it on the page, but you understanding the complexities of it help you to tell that story?
Yes, very much so. And I would say there are plotters and there are pantsers,
Right.
and I am a pantser. I go in with a general idea of what I want to write. Obviously, when you're writing a series, you have to have it outlined somewhat.
Sure.
But I go in with a basic idea of what I want, what the character is like, and then I let them tell the story.
So, like you said, in a series, you kind of need to know where you're going. But do you begin each book with, maybe there's a final destination and you know where that is, But I like to liken it to a road trip across country. If you're going from San Diego to New York, where you're going to wind up, but you could take I-20 and kind of go the southern end,
Right.
or you could take Route 66 and kind of wander through that way. There's a lot of different ways you could
Right.
go. Do you kind of liken it like that? Like, I know where I'm ultimately going, but the characters and I are going to go on a trip together.
Very much so. And sometimes the characters surprise me. I know that sounds weird in my head, where all of a sudden I'll be writing something and one of them says something, even though I'm writing it, I think that's ingenious. Like, and
Yeah.
so just recently in the last book, I decided who the bad guy was going to be. And it was all worked out. Everything was good. And then I thought, no, I think I'm going to swap that up. And so, but it wasn't until I was halfway through the book that it surprised me that I was going to swap it up. So it's a fun adventure when you start writing a book. It's a little nerve wracking when you first start. And then by
Yeah.
the end, you're like, this is enjoyable.
So that first book that you wrote,
Yes.
let's go back there and visit this from reading this Regency romance, and it was not up to par. You can do better than that. Your mom encourages you. Well, Laura, go do it. What then?
So I've always had stories in my head, and it surprises me that people don't have stories in their heads. And
Right.
so it's because I'm like,
Like,
what do you
do
guys?
you not play with the people that live in your
Yes,
head like I do?
exactly. It's like, what do you think about when you lay down to bed? You
Right.
don't think of these stories. And so I started writing this story, and I did a lot of hikes where I would go on and I start thinking about what I wanted to write and take naps, because that's where I kind of play through the situation. Um, but it was difficult because I never had an experience of writing a book. My only experience that I had, it was a reader. And so I obviously knew about the Regency time period, because for the people that aren't familiar, the Regency time period is between 1811 and 1822, around that time period, and it's in England. So Jane Austen wrote during that time period.
Right.
And so, well, Jane Austen was alive during that time period. So, of course, she wrote during that time period. But um, so there's very different specific terminology that you have to use. So I had that down and titles and stuff, but I didn't know about the grammar stuff. So I had my friend help me. And then obviously I got to the point where I hired an editor. And then I was fortunate because the first publisher I reached out to accepted it. So I was very fortunate on that.
Wow. So the first book that you wrote is the first book that you published?
Yes.
Wow, that is a rare thing
Yes.
indeed. How much time between writing that first book and publishing?
About 6 months.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That it when you're in the thick of it,
Yes.
you usually don't have time to stop and think about how rare this is. How this is not most people's experience. When did you get the presence of mind to think, oh, this is not everybody's experience?
It wasn't until because I reached out, and actually, just to let you know, the first time I used the publisher, it's actually a vanity publisher. So
Gotcha.
I didn't realize it wasn't not normal, or it wasn't normal to pay. So I paid a
Yeah.
small sum, but I retained the rights. And so you still had to go through this whole criteria. And one of my favorite authors was the writer for them, and that's how I found them. And I went and I published a series with them. And then once I discovered how, I don't want to say how little they did, because they helped me jump. They were a very
Yeah.
good company, have nothing but praise to say about them. But I realized I could do it on my own. And that's when I started self-publishing, after I started establishing a name for myself. And because I retained the rights, I was able to put them on Kindle Unlimited.
What was that first series?
It was the Beckett Files. Saving
Okay.
Shadow was the first one. And
Gotcha.
it revolved around a spying family. So
Okay.
there were female spies in there. which is actually very uncommon during the Regency time period because England thought spying was distasteful and a lady would never spy.
Of course not.
Yes. But
Yeah.
obviously, we know George Washington used a whole network of female spies and they were never caught. And so I believe there were spies, they were just not documented.
Of course. What was it about the Regency period that you loved?
So I love the thought of honorable gentlemen and just good gentlemen. Obviously, we know from history that back in that time period, gentlemen were not always honorable. But
Right.
I just like
But
the
they are today, thank God.
yes, and I just like the thought of they were just good and lords and ladies, where they were
Right.
just all kind of having fun and just enjoying life.
Gotcha. So it was just this love of the time period, and Jane Austen, of course, is kind of the touchstone that a lot of people, when you're trying to describe Regency romance for someone who's not familiar, you say, "Oh, Jane Austen." You know,
Yes.
that's kind of the most accessible author for the masses. Were there other authors in this genre that you gravitated toward?
Well, once again, women did not, a respectable woman did not write. Obviously, there were women back in that time period who did write, but Jane Austen, when she first wrote her first book, it was titled under a lady. So I've actually referenced Pride and Prejudice a few times in my books because it came out in 1813, and so, anyways, it's just that's the person I was going for. But there's also a lot of authors nowadays that write Regency that I emulated very much so. There are so
Well,
many good Regency authors.
there really are, and it's really having a moment right now where there's lots of stories being told in this time period, and lots of great things going on in the genre. One thing that I'm always intrigued by is the way that romance in general and Regency romance, maybe specifically, is kind of shunned by a lot of men, and men that might read them don't admit it, or they'll never admit that they read their books right after their wife gets done. They pass them over, and but there's so much about the society and the interpersonal relationships
Mhm.
that are more than, and I hate to say it this way, mere romance.
Yes.
But it really is a deep genre, or at least has the potential to be. Do you have many men that write to you, or that you hear from, that love your books?
So I actually have someone on my ARC team who's a man, and so he and his wife both read the books and then give their opinions on it. And but it's mostly women who like Regency romance, just like it's mostly women that like Jane Austen. I was
Right.
I was very saddened when my son, when I mentioned Jane Austen and he said, "Who's that? Is that one of your friends?" I thought my heart
Oh,
was going to die. I'm like, public school system and your mother have failed you.
have failed you. Laura, you have one series that really caught my attention. It's a time travel, the Twickenham time travel series. Where did that idea come from?
So it's actually that was a collaboration with other authors,
Okay.
and we all wrote kind of in this little time travel like spectrum, the sphere. We kind of had this starting point, and we worked around it. And I decided just to write about Regency time period because there's so many things that you could. There's amusement to that we find like a woman would never call on a gentleman back then, and my person, one of the person in the first book, she was a Harvard educated doctor. And why couldn't she call on a gentleman? And so it was fun because she got transported back into 1813. And so they all did, all this group of people. And it was just a lot of fun of kind of poking fun at the Regency time period without
Yeah.
poking fun because I love the Regency time period.
Right. Well, some of the most admirable fun poking, if you will, is from things that you love. That's where a lot of great satire comes from, is because we poke fun at things that we love. Because if you don't love it, it comes across as mean spirited, and nobody wants to read that. I mean,
Right.
let's be honest.
And it was, like I said, really enjoyed the time travel. Fortunately, not a lot of readership followed because Regency is a very niche that has a lot of loyal followers, and they don't like to
Yeah,
change the genre very much.
yeah. So that first series that you published with the we'll say Vanity Press because that's the word you use, but if you found value in it and they helped you to kind of jumpstart your career, then we can't look down our nose at that. That was
Not at all.
ultimately a good experience, right?
It was. And they were fantastic. Like I said, it basically taught me how to set myself up for self-publishing. I did also publish another series through a traditional publisher, Dragon Blade, which was fantastic. Sorry, ignore my daughter. She's home for lunch. And so I had another good experience for them, but I just discovered that self-publishing is what I enjoy the most because I release books every 2 months.
Gotcha. So when did you start kind of realizing? Well, first off, what year were you publishing? How long ago was this?
So the first book, Saving Shadow, was published in September of 2017.
Okay, 2017. So by that point, the Kindle had been out for 6 or 7 years, meaning that Amazon's self-publishing platform, KDP, had reached maturity, and really lots of tools were available to authors. So
Yes.
how did you kind of start getting your feet wet when you're using the publishing company to help you get that first series started? When you decided to take this new series that you were doing completely on your own, kind of what were some of the steps that you
Sorry, ignore
followed?
my husband.
No,
Uh,
it's fine.
so after the way the Vanity publisher worked is I paid a fee and they would take it and basically format the book.
Yeah,
So everything else, the editor I paid for, the cover artist I paid for. So I already had a network, a team of how to do that. And so when I was done with the last book, I had started collaborating with other authors. And they said, well, we do it self publishing. We all release our own books on our own platforms. And I had one of the great things about Regency authors is they are very supportive of one another. And they helped me make that step. And so after that first series I did with the Vanity, I took off on my own after that.
that's fantastic. When did you start getting feedback from readers? Like, when did you start realizing that there was a readership out there and that you could tap into the market of readers out there?
So as I tell a lot of authors that the first year I lost money, second
Yeah,
year I lost money, and then from then on it kind of skyrocketed. It wasn't until my third year, obviously I was getting good feedback and good reviews because
yeah,
it propelled me to keep going, but it wasn't until I broke off on my own. And also the first series was not on Kindle Unlimited. And so I love Kindle Unlimited, and that's where I
yeah.
get most of my readership. And so probably after my first series and I started on it is when I started moving forward. And now I I try not to read my reviews. I make my PA read it because they can kind of get me into a spiral. Even though I have mostly good reviews, I am very blessed as an author
Yeah.
because I have a lot of people that are very positive. There are still some readers that are very critical about almost your personality. So they
Yeah.
attack the little things, but for the most part, the readers have very good constructive criticism.
And for every 100 glowing positive reviews, there's that one, and for whatever reason that
Yes.
one sticks in your head and can ruin your day,
Yep.
when there's 100 of people that are just glowing over it, and
Exactly.
that's just human nature, I guess.
And my favorite is when I get a 1-star review on Goodreads and the book hasn't even been published. Those are my favorite because I'm
Yeah.
like, I know you're not on my ARC team, and you just
Yeah.
left a 1-star review. So there are just some people.
They're just trolls out there
Yes, there
for,
are.
yeah.
But for the most part, as you said, I get all these great reviews, but it's just that one that sticks with you. So I've learned not to read my reviews.
Yeah. So, a craft question for you, since you are admittedly a pantser, and you said that when you're starting a series, you have an end goal in
Yes.
mind, but maybe don't know how you're going to get
Yes.
there. Do you know from the beginning how many books are going to be in this particular series?
So this current series, Lord and Ladies of Mayfair, that I'm getting ready to release my 4th book, I had planned on 5 books,
Okay.
and it's already up to 7 because the characters, all of a sudden I have to write in a character that I'm like, you get a book and you get a book. And so it's right now at 7, and I've put my cover artist on watch that I might do one more.
Gotcha. What determines when you get to the end of one story arc that's going to be a book? Um, are you already thinking about where the second book is going to
Yes.
go, and do you leave yourself little breadcrumbs that you could pick up the story in the next book? How do you? I guess what I'm asking is, how do you prepare for writing a series, and when you know that this particular story arc is finished, and did you leave yourself enough for a second story arc for book 2, book
Yes.
3, etc.?
So I make sure that the way I write, like what I read, like to read. And so I like happily ever afters. So in every end of my book, it concludes with a couple getting their own happily ever after. But the side characters are the fun ones. Those are the ones you can write about. And I put enough in there because I kind of know, I have a general idea of who these people are and what their personality traits are. So,
Yeah.
and then I tend to find, I don't want to say the best one, but you start with a really solid character and then you kind of work up to another solid character to keep the readers interested. And so I have the one that I just wrote that I submitted to my editor. She's really quirky, and she actually wanted to write. Well, of course, quirky is not a word in Regency time period, but that's how I describe her. But she also wanted to write her own book, and she didn't care if she was a spinster. And so that kind of her story arc has been in all different of the books, along with the other characters too. But I definitely know on the characters who to have them, but sometimes who they end up with surprise even me.
Gotcha. What is your longest running series?
It would have to be my first one, the Beckett Files, and that one is there's 8 books. So,
8 books.
but this one is getting pretty close. So this series might be there.
How do you know when a series is finished?
Well, normally I kind of have an idea with the characters and everything, but in my first series, I'd always planned on one more book. But by then, I had already started self-publishing and moving on onto my own. And I still get emails from people asking if I was going to write a book for this character. She was never supposed to have a book, but I decided, excuse me, in the last one to kind of enhance her character and maybe write a book. And I regret, that's the one time I regret not writing a book, but it's been too long to go back now. But normally I just kind of just wrap it up all. I feel when it's done, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. From a publishing business
Mhm.
perspective, and this is not about the storytelling aspect of it, but from the, if you put your publisher hat on for a minute, is it easier to, and by easier I mean, is it more profitable? Is it easier to market? Whatever easier means to you. Is it easier to publish one more book in an existing series, or is it easier to start a new series? And easier is maybe not the right word.
Yeah.
Is it more profitable? Is it easier to market a separate series than it is a book 5 of an existing series? Like what kind of considerations do you take into account when launching a new series or continuing an existing one?
So I take account into just if the story's still there, if the story still excites me as the reader and the writer. In the case of the Becca Files and not writing that one series, it would just be too long to go back now. I think I would get people to read it, but keep writing in my current series is definitely more profitable. And also releasing books every 2 months, it's a lot easier to market and it's a lot easier for profit because there's always a dip in my reads. You know, I release one and it goes spikes up and then it goes down in the off one. But with releasing books every 2 months, there's always that spike. So it's great to keep writing, and I'll keep writing a series as long as people keep being interested.
Yeah. Um, 2023 is an amazing time to be a publisher, a writer. There's so many avenues for discovery and so many ways that people can read your book. They can, buy the paperbacks and carry it around. They can, they can have a Kindle like I do and have, 4 million books on there, and that's only partly an exaggeration on my Kindle. A lot of people are reading on the Kindle app on their
Yes.
phone.
Yep.
It's not my favorite, but I know a lot of people that love doing that.
I do it on
Um,
vacation.
yeah. What ways are working for you now to communicate with readers, to let people know that you have a new book coming out? Granted, you've with almost 50 individual books published so far, you have a loyal readership that are following along and ready for the next book. But what things are available to you now that lets you find new readers? And because you constantly have to be adding new blood to your readership, and what things are available to you now?
So obviously there's social media, which I'm kind of terrible at. I have a PA that posts stuff for me on social media. Also, collaborations with other authors are fantastic. Unfortunately, with this year, because of my timetable of how fast I'm releasing books, I haven't been able to do a collaboration with the other authors. But I'm hoping next year that I do that because you find new readership through their readers. Um, but I also, anytime when I go to some of these sites and people look for new books, um, I send them free books. I send them ebooks.
Nice.
And or if someone reaches out to me, like I just had someone who reached out to me and said, my 13-year-old daughter is interested in your books. Are they clean? And I said, they are very clean. And then I sent her a signed copy of a book because she's 13. Like, you got to
Nice.
encourage readers. So,
Absolutely.
um, so anytime someone reaches out with a question, I'm always quick to respond. And I think also releasing books every 2 months, Amazon pushes my books too, because I also have ads on Amazon. So they push my books because I am releasing them so much and I have such good positive reviews.
So you're on a 2 month release schedule. Is
Yes.
that religiously every 2 months?
Yes. For at least for this series, for last series and for this series. And it's
Okay.
been fantastic. So everyone's like, how do you write? I said, how can you not write? Like these stories are in my head and I just sit down. So it's a full-time job for me now.
Yeah.
At first it was like a hobby that my husband financed. So very sweet husband. And now it's turned into a career. So it's fantastic.
Nice. So, one argument that you hear from the planner side of the writer camp is that pantsers, you never know when you're going to be done because you're just writing, to the whims or whatever. Just to play devil's advocate, how do you stay on such an ambitious publishing schedule while also being a pantser?
Well, I know that each one of I always try to keep my books consistent word count wise. So I always know, okay, my first book of the series was about 83,000 words. So each book after that needs to be around 80,000 words.
Yeah.
So I go into it knowing how many. I also go into it where tend to have a little longer chapters. So I know exactly how long the chapters need to be in order to get that word count. So I am a pantser when it comes to the characters, but I do definitely scrutinize in other aspects, like for the business side.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, the one thing that I love to ask writers is the moment of creation. And I know that you've said, there are characters roaming around in your head all the time and who's, who are begging to tell their stories. But what is the moment of creation like for a new series? 1 minute it doesn't exist, and then a character walks onto the stage of your mind or whatever, and you're like, well, who are you? And, what are you doing? How does that start unfolding for you?
So as I mentioned before, I love naps. I lay down every day because I wake up at 5 o'clock to write before my kids are up. And I take a nap. And when I lay down, I think of story ideas before I fall asleep. And just sometimes I think of what if, what if this would happen? And then that kind of just sparks into what else could happen. And then I start getting all these glimpses of these scenes that I need to write, but I go, no, I do not write out of order. I write every chapter by chapter. So I know some authors, they write out of order and bring their stories together, but I like to just write down my initial idea and move on.
Gotcha. Laura, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, where's the best place for them to go find you and pitch your latest series that you said book 4, I believe it is coming out in a few weeks?
So I'm a little old when I tell you this, but Facebook, I'm a little more active on Facebook. And I know that TikTok, I had some TikTok videos, which, I'm trying different avenues. Instagram also I'm at. So I'm both there. But if you send me a message on Facebook, I'll respond.
And you also have a website, right?
Yes, I do.
And what is that website address?
It's authorlaurabeers.com.
Great. We'll link up all those places to make it easy for folks to find you. And what's your new series? What's it called?
The Lords and Ladies of Mayfair. And Mayfair is a big place in London.
What's your elevator pitch for this series?
It is a fun story. There's a lot of secrets, a lot of secrets in there, which is fantastic. There are spies in there, bad guys that you can't really figure out what's going on. It's supposed to be a lot of intrigue.
We love secrets and intrigue, so
Yes.
that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll link that up in the show notes of this episode as well. Laura, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you for letting me come on. I appreciate it.